Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Art of Cybersecurity with me, Chirag Joshi. Today's session is a special one because we are going to talk about entrepreneurship and the art of cyber entrepreneurship. And I'm joined by an individual who wears so many hats that I have a hard time keeping up, but he does an exceptional work in the industry and is well respected not just in Australia, but globally in the cybersecurity and broader security industry. So it's my absolute privilege to be joined by David Fairman for this episode. I'll let David introduce himself and we can kick off the session. So with that, David, thank you so much for joining the Art of Cybersecurity series. I'm really honored and privileged to have you on the show. Could you please give the listeners and the audience few insights into all the great things that you do?
Sure. Well, firstly, thank you, Chirag, for having me here. I feel privileged and honoured for you asking me to join one of these sessions. So thank you very much. Look, a little bit about me for the audience, in case you don't know me. I'm David Fairman. I wear multiple hats today. In the past 2 years, I've had this bit of a career change where now I'm working very heavily in the technology space. I'm the CIO, Chief Information Officer, and Chief Security Officer in APAC for Netscope, a large cybersecurity security company. I'm also a partner and CISO in residence at a venture capital firm called 630. They're a US-based company, but we have global presence, and we invest in fintech, digital health, and cyber and privacy. And I sit on a few boards of cybersecurity companies. But prior to that, I had a very successful and long career in banking and finance. I was the Chief Security Officer in Australia here for National Australia Bank, and I ran everything cyber, fraud, investigations, physical security for the bank. And prior to that, I was the Group CISO for Royal Bank of Canada out of Toronto and New York. I was with JP Morgan before that. I had a couple of CISO roles with the Royal Bank of Scotland. So look, I've had a pretty privileged career. We've been able to work globally in the US, in continental Europe, UK, and of course here in Asia. But yeah, I think I'm pretty fortunate, and I think that experience really helps me in my new world, working in technology and in the startup space. And I'm hoping the audience gets a great insights from this conversation, this dialogue, and I hope I'm able to impart some knowledge that keeps them thinking.
David, look, that's what I was saying. I had a hard time keeping up with all the awesome things you've done. It's a CISO, a CISO. You help new startups. You've been on boards, continue to do that, and you provide valuable insights to the industry and demonstrate leadership across the board. And I know I've seen evidence of that all over. And you're very active on LinkedIn as well. So shout out to folks to follow you on LinkedIn because a lot of good things get posted there. So with that, David, let's just get in the heart of the conversation. And topic for today was art of cyber entrepreneurship. And you have a unique vantage point based on experiences that you've gleaned over the years. Firstly, I want to start with what does entrepreneurship mean to you? And then we can go into what does entrepreneurship mean in a cybersecurity context?
Well, good question. I think entrepreneurship to me, the way I think about that is it's an organization, it's an individual having a desire to change the world or change something, make an impact on something. They know that there's a problem that needs to be solved, or maybe they've got that fire in the belly, that curiosity that wants them to go out and find that problem that needs to be solved. And they pull in all the right pieces of the puzzle together to build it and to help solve that problem. So that for me, I think it's a piece around, a curiosity and a desire to want to fix and solve a problem. That's how I think about entrepreneurship and building a business while you do it.
Well, I think it's really, that's just really an important point, right? Is a desire to make things better and a desire to add value. And I think that to me is a classic, quality of a good entrepreneur. Now, when it comes to cybersecurity, David, how does it extend, right? Like, where do you see cybersecurity professionals and folks who are building organizations, thinking of ideas? How do you see them play a role in entrepreneurship? What does that mean to them, both in organizational context as an individual, but also as they're solving problems through tools, technologies, services?
Yeah, look, I think there's a few different dimensions there. One, I think as a professional, as a cybersecurity professional, And I think about my previous roles, I've had to go in to build security functions and understand and identify problems in the organization and figure out how we solve for those problems. So there's an element of just pure entrepreneurship there. It's about that curiosity, about that ability or that desire to want to solve a problem and to make things better, right? So that there's a core element to that. And I think that's in the enterprise space. I think also we as security professionals can make an impact into the cyber industry more broadly. We can work with entrepreneurs, we can work with founders and CEOs of these startups that are identifying these challenges and these gaps in the market. And we can work with them just in the same spirit of wanting to solve a problem in our own world. Yep. We can work with them, partner with them to solve a problem that we know is going to make a bigger impact in the industry. And I think that's something that I try to do now with my venture capital hat on. When I think about investing in companies, I think about investing in companies that I think are going to make a real difference to the way that we try to manage cyber risk in our everyday organizations, day in, day out. So it's about trying to, and there's a few things I think about there. I look at the founders themselves. Do they have the curiosity, the fire in the belly, the drive to go and do that? Do I believe that they believe in the mission that they're trying to achieve? Do I think they have the right technical capability? Do I think that they have the right team around them to solve those problems? And I think, in my previous roles in enterprise, I felt very strongly about partnering with startups and early stage companies and helping them on their journey, because I knew that they would be ultimately an extension of my security function. They're the ones who are developing some of the tools that my teams would implement and operate. So they become this extension of my world. Yeah. So for me, I wanted to help them be successful because they were going to help me in return.
That's really good, right? I mean, it's almost an ecosystem where
it's a symbiotic relationship. It's a symbiotic relationship, the way I see it.
Definitely. And on that topic, David, right? Just with the gaps in the market and your venture capital hat on. Now, obviously, cybersecurity industry, a booming industry, and we're all fortunate to be part of that and be able to, I think our work now has the most impact than ever has, just with the nature of, the interconnectedness of technology across the world, how much we rely on trusting technology. In one of the episodes in this series, I was talking to Rocky Scopoletti, and what we talked about was that trust is now moving from institutions to technology. People are placing their trust in technology, and which is where you see Web 3.0 and a decentralized model now coming to bear. It is an interesting times, and the trust there requires cybersecurity to be at the forefront of it. So, I mean, we are impacting a paradigm shift in economies, in cultures, and in many different areas. I mean, so that's how I see the role of cybersecurity so much more now than protecting, information assets and systems, as important as those things are. So with that, and just the broad landscape which we operate in, we do have a lot of people now trying to enter the industry, which is good. But we also have some interesting practices that come about. A lot of vendors who are entering the market, some of them delivering solutions, but a lot of them overlapping with each other.
Yes.
And having been on a side of running a cyber function, you almost have a tool sprawl everywhere, and it's becoming a challenge. So as a venture capitalist and as a senior executive, when you see that play out, how do you make sense of what are the gaps? How are they solving those gaps? And if this service, this product is actually coming with the intention of solving, a real problem, or it's just along because it's a good hot industry, let's make the most of it. How do you separate that out?
Yeah, look, I think I think when you get to know the entrepreneurs and you get to meet them and you get to spend some time with them, you start to understand whether or not they're on this journey because they believe in solving the problem and making things better. But in saying that, there's nothing wrong with being in an industry because it's a hot space and there's an opportunity to create wealth by doing that. There's nothing wrong with that, provided you're going to do that in a way that makes the industry better. So, but for me, it's not so much about deciphering between that. For me, it's ultimately around, from an entrepreneur's perspective, I think the advice I give them is listen to your customers, understand the problems they're trying to solve for, think about how you can help them. And I think there's also a piece around, when it's one thing to listen to them, and you need to listen to and understand their needs, but you also need to think about how do you build your business and how do you become differentiated. To your point around, there's so many, in some cases, there's a lot of people trying to solve the same problem. But what I've learned in my own experience is there's a lot of different ways you can solve a problem. There's more than one way to skin a cat.
Yes.
And I think that's why there's a lot of opportunity here, because actually there's never really one right answer, the way I see it, because every environment, technology organization, company will have different needs, different infrastructures, different architectures. And therefore there is room for differences in solving the same problem, because it's about how it integrates into that broader ecosystem. Yeah. Managing cyber risk and digital risk is an ecosystem play. It's not a cybersecurity play. We're only one part of that puzzle. Right? It's a much bigger puzzle that we need to pull together. So I think, as a practitioner and as a venture capitalist, you need to understand that it's not just one company that's going to win the race. I think there's room for multiple organizations. The differentiator will be, how do they message the problem they're trying to solve for?
Yeah.
How well do they integrate into that bigger ecosystem? And I think there's a piece around, how do they build relationships with their customers? I think that's really, really important. And understanding and having a real genuine desire to make the customers every day easier is really, really important, versus just make a sale. Two different things.
Oh, well said, right? I mean, I think that's that relationship building aspect of it, and the integration with the broader ecosystem you mentioned. I think those are really vital attributes, because you're right. There are multiple ways to solve a problem, and sometimes, even if you come at the same problem with a different insight, you can create a niche for yourself. So, I think that's an actionable advice for all individuals and entrepreneurs, and the attributes that you expect. Now, as a venture capitalist, I'm sure you have people pitching to you, in many different forums, reaching out to you. What advice would you give? And even better, if you could think of an example, even if you don't name names, that's fine. But if an example of where somebody pitched to you, somebody came to you with an idea, and you were just blown away by that, and you immediately said, yeah, this is a no-brainer. What do you look for, and how do people get there?
Yeah, look, I think let's start with the advice, right? I think one thing I would say is be very clear on your messaging, and don't wait for the person you're pitching to ask, hang on, what problem are you trying to solve? What I see is there's a lot of solutions out there.
Right.
I've got this great bit of tech that can go and do X. That's cool, but why do I want it to go and do X? Why do I need that? What problem is it solving for me?
Yeah.
And I think it's really important for you to be clear as whether or not that problem is something that needs to be solved. And I've said this a few times. There's a lot of problems out there, but not all of them need to be fixed today, right? And I've seen that as a practitioner in the banks, where I would have a 3-year roadmap, and I would know what projects I wanted to do over the course of the next 3 years. So yes, you might have a really good bit of tech that does something really cool. It's not even on my roadmap for the next 3 years. I can't dispute that it's cool. It's good. It does something good. Absolutely. It's just not a priority for me. So I think when you're trying to get into this space, do some market research. Understand, is it really a problem that needs to be solved for today? I think for entrepreneurs, they're building a business. That business needs to sell to be successful. It's great if you build a tool, but if you're too early to market and the market isn't ready for you, you're not going to be able to sell it. So think about those things. I think that's really practical advice. I've seen two companies, to your point about things that I've seen that I thought, wow, that's great. I've seen 2 companies like that. But is they were probably a bit too early for the market as well. I think they were really, really good, but I think they were a little bit too early for the market. And therefore, a lot of investment goes into these companies, but the market isn't ready to solve for those problems yet, which then becomes a wasted opportunity for those resources, for those people, and for that investment, right? So I think there's some challenges there. So think about the timing. I guess the question I always ask is, okay, it's a problem that wants to be, it's an important problem. The second part I ask is, well, will I prioritize my funding, my investment budget to solve that problem? Because as you know, as a security practitioner, you've always got a list of things that you want to get done. There's always stuff at the bottom of that list that doesn't get done. So even though it's on the list, you're not going to prioritize money or resources to go and solve that just yet, right? So I think there's some pieces around that. So that's probably a little bit of advice, and I think you need to work through that. And maybe that's a bit of a product market fit conversation. I think it's also getting out, listening, coming back to the point I made before, listen to your customers.
Yeah.
And maybe that's where we see a lot of startups pivot a little. And I think pivoting and being agile is very, very healthy. I think that is a good thing. You might start down this path, but as you're engaging with customers and you're learning more, you then pivot to solve something, because what you had was actually close but not quite, and that product market fit, I think, is really, really important.
That is just that segment right there. It's such actionable, real talk right there. He's come with that curiosity. What is the problem you're trying to solve? And that to me is such a simple thing, but such an overlooked fact. There's so many messages I get where whether you have people, trying to educate you on services and vendors, that's fine, right? But we have artificial intelligence, machine learning. It's like, what problem? Why do I care? And you nailed it. And I really like that. But also being early to the market, that's such a unique insight, right? You would think the first mover advantage would work in your favor. But the challenge with that is you're almost trying to educate an entire marketplace on why that is important to you. And I also think it depends on the industry vertical which you're trying to serve. I reckon some are more mature, like financial services, at least in Australia and globally too, is one of the more mature industries where folks can think about automating, trying to have orchestration tools to automate processes that are already there. But for many industry verticals, even the foundational processes are lacking. And for them, I think it's a very different conversation with regards to their cyber risk profile, their investment profile, their prioritization. So I think it's almost like which industry you're targeting. I've seen some vendors in Australia who actually done a nice niche for themselves by targeting the small business industry. I mean, that's who they care about. That's their main audience. And I think that to me is a very good way to think, because you kind of focused on an audience, their problems, you want to listen to them and then serve them. I think that works better than having such a wide net that you cast that it's not very clear as to what's the utility of your unique proposition.
Yeah, 100%. I think, and I just want to double click on something you just said, because I think you're right. It's be very clear on the messaging, what problem you're trying to solve, and be very clear on why you're different.
Yeah.
Right. So it's those two things I think are really, really, really important. And quite often I find that people who are pitching aren't good at articulating that with clarity. And I think that's really important.
Yeah. And look, I mean, the industry now and the cybersecurity industry has people from all different disciplines, which is awesome, right? This is not just a tech industry. It has people from everywhere. And I always believe that, a lot of what we do is fundamentally a human issue. So, people from risk backgrounds, finance background, audit backgrounds, marketing, other disciplines, there is just so much room for everyone. So when you have that diversity of thought, to me, I think that would help entrepreneurs to deliver better as opposed to just being tech-led, because they can be really good at that. But to your point, they'll fail with a differentiating conversation, the right audience with the right messaging. So I think having that diversity of thought early on, at least from my vantage point, would be a good thing. When I look at the composition of who's part of that organization, I think that to me tells a lot on how they will shape up. And you, in your role as a as a board director, and you sit on many different boards for cybersecurity organizations, how do you guide and advise those companies? Like, because sometimes you may have come in a bit later in the game, sometimes you maybe have been there since they were born, essentially. How have you been able to navigate them in the right direction?
Look, I think a lot of it is around giving them advice from my own experience as a practitioner for many, many years, right? Like ultimately, their success is going to be built off the ability for them to sell into the market.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
There's two trains of thought I want to go through. Let me finish that piece, then I want to come back to something that I think is really, really important as well. They need to be able to sell into the market. So I've been a buyer for 20 odd years.
Yeah.
Right. Only recently, and I'm not a seller even. I'm an investor. Those companies go and sell. So I have them use me as an advisor, as a sounding board on what I would expect. So there's a lot of experience. I guess I pass on my experience and I try to steer them down that path on, is this a problem that needs to be solved? Obviously, I have some, my CIO hat with Netscope keeps me very engaged with, because operationally, I have operational responsibility for a technology company. Yes. So now I need to understand what are our problems and what do we need to solve for, so I can give them insights from there. I'm engaging a lot with people across the industry, so I understand, thematics and themes and challenges and areas that people are talking about. I try to feed that in, so to give them that intelligence. So there's that one piece. I think there's also a piece around, and this is for us as buyers. I used to be, when I was a security practitioner, or particularly primarily a security practitioner, I should say, when I was in the banks, I would have all these startups and these companies trying to get in front of me to talk to me. They want to talk to the CISO. They want to talk to the CSO because they want to pitch, right? They want to sell to me. Yeah. And I used to be a little bit like, look, I don't want to talk to another vendor. I don't want to talk to another salesperson. But what I forgot, because I think the security teams broadly are so detached from the front end line of the business, your organization needs to sell for them to make money. You work for a sales organization. Anyway, you might not be frontline sales, but your organization needs to sell a service or a product for them to make money, for you to have a job. Very, very, very clear, right? So I've got a healthy respect now for sales teams and sales-focused organizations, because I'm sort of more connected to the front line of the business than I am to the back office of the business in my previous roles. So I want to share that, because I think in my previous roles, I lost sight of that. And I know when I talk to some of my peers, that might not be as evident to them. Well, I think it's very important that, and recognize your organization is trying to sell products and services to customers because there's a need or there's a gap in the market, right? The people who are trying to sell to you as you build out your organization, build out your capabilities, these startups, these entrepreneurs, they're trying to find that gap in the market to give you something that you need to make your life better. Yeah. So just recognize there's a bit of again, we used that term before, symbiotic relationship. There is a symbiotic relationship there. There's a parallel there.
Yeah. Hey, that's a really good thing for people to remember. I mean, you're right. In the midst of your daily operational grinds of running a security function and all the madness that comes with it, it can be easy to discount the importance of it. And you're absolutely right. I mean, there is so much you can learn from it too when you engage, and when you have good vendors who engage with you. And actually, some of the best learnings I have had is through some of these interactions where they're not trying to sell you something aggressively. It's more about building a relationship. You can see that play out, and you get good ideas. And then when you want to execute on the ideas, guess who you'd call? The person who gave you that idea. So,
exactly. And the advice I always give to sales teams and entrepreneurs is think of customers as a bank. So I've got a strong financial services banking background. Before I can take a withdrawal from that bank, which is a sale, I need to make some deposits. Right? So I need to put some money in the bank before I can take something out. So if you're trying to build a relationship with the customer, what are you giving them? What deposits are you making to them along the way? And that's not necessarily taking them out for a meal. How are you helping them think through some of their challenges? Are you helping them connect the dots? Because actually, you might have a lot of insight into other vendors and other problems and into the industry. Listen, coming back to that point I made, listen to them. What other challenges that can you help them out with, make their life easier with, that might not actually result in a direct sale for you, but that's a deposit. You're actually you're making their life easier. You're building that strong relationship. You mentioned the word trust. You're building that trust. Very important.
Hey, what an awesome analogy. Before you make some withdrawals, start putting some deposits. And I love that. It's such a good practical way to think about it, right? Is give first, and then you will have reciprocation. And I think that to me we're talking in the context of entrepreneurship, in the context of cybersecurity, but even networking, right? As we think about all the people who reach out for career advice or just to grow their skills, the same thing applies. If you show interest in people, if you listen to them first, one of the actionable tips that we had on this series was, easy way to network is just ask somebody, what are the awesome things you're working on, right? It's the same thing is, what are the biggest problem that you have? I mean, that helps you open up communication channels, which can then lead to many, many good outcomes. So with that, David, with all the things we've covered, obviously with the financial services background, the things that you mentioned in terms of your work with organizations, their advice, you also mentioned that you engage a lot with industry. And I've seen that is you talk to a lot of people, you get all the trends. What to you are the 2 or 3 big ticket items that you feel need solving or should be addressed by us as an industry, which is not getting as much attention as you would like?
Oh, really good question. Really good question. I think there's a couple of things. I think we as an industry need to get a little bit sharper with understanding how we can truly create value for the organization. A security function, cybersecurity function, isn't just about protecting the organization. It's about protecting the organization, but enabling them to create value. So how are you creating value for your frontline teams? i.e., how are you letting them share and collaborate on very sensitive data with third parties and do that safely? As an example, how are the practices that your security function are implementing, making it faster and easier and safer for the application development teams to deploy code to meet these customer requirements and deploy that to the cloud and do it in a safe and fast way? Not create those blockers. I think, your measure of your success as a security executive is thinking about how am I enabling my organization to go faster, not slower. So think about the consumers. Who are the consumers of those security services? How would they measure your success? Yeah. That's how you should be measuring your own success. So I think there's a piece around how do we articulate? So coming back to your point, your question is how do we articulate and demonstrate, I think is probably the key word, demonstrate how we're creating value for our organizations. 1. 2, I think there's a piece around a broader appreciation of what we mean by digital risk. I think we talk about cyber risk. I think we talk about digital. But particularly with this digital agenda and this data agenda that organizations are traversing now with digital transformation, do we really understand what we mean by a broader digital risk? Because ultimately, digital risk is any risk that can be introduced through digital channels or digital processes. So that can be, and for me, and I'll refer to Astari, which is a sort of a think tank company that I used to do some consulting work for. We came up with three pillars of digital risk. Cyber risk being one of those pillars. Digital operational risk, so failure of digital services as a result of human or technology failure. Yep. And third, digital value creation risk. Your organization goes on the journey on this digital transformation to create value for the organization. That was built on a business case. What if that digital transformation doesn't result in that value that was expected to be created? Right. That's a business risk, right? It's an impact to the organization. So I think we need to think broader about our role and how do we help manage those digital risks. So I think they're two very strategic elements. I think in terms of point solutions or very tactical, or maybe not technical, very technical, let's use the word technical solutions. I think we need to get much better with digital ID. I think we've got, you mentioned it, Web3, metaverse coming down the path. I think that's going to be a big challenge for us in terms of liability for organizations, in terms of how people are going to feel, in this, virtual and merged world. So I think there's a lot of challenges coming down there. I don't think we as an industry don't really have a good handle on that yet. So I'll leave you with those few bits of insight. So probably a little bit different to what you might have expected, but they're sort of the big things that I think about.
Hey, that's why you operate the level you do, right? I mean, it's because you are thinking ahead with that, and I really like that idea of digital risk, because you're right. Too often is cyber risk is one pillar, but it's not the full thing.
Yes.
It's that value from digitization. That's such a really good point, David. I mean, it's something for us to chew on and internalize. We could have targets as to efficiencies to be gleaned and more people you can reach via digital channels. All good, but what are the things you get out? Because a lot of research studies is showing us that many transformation programs are not delivering the outcomes that they promised. Right? I mean,
Exactly.
They're failing.
That's a risk to the strategy, right? That's a risk to the business strategy, because the business has said we're going to do this digitization or this digital strategy because we're going to create these outcomes or we're going to achieve this. It's a risk to that strategy that's not being managed well.
Yeah, and sadly, you're right. I mean, it's the benefits are not there. The cost overruns are almost a given every single time. So it's not all within the the influence of cybersecurity, but we have a key role to play. And to your point about identity and digital identity, that's going to be a very powerful problem for us to solve. We struggle with that today. Even before the metaverse, but once we get there, who are you doing business with? Is that the brand? That impersonation, that trust is going to become much harder if you don't solve that. So it's brilliant insights. Look, we're getting to the close. I really appreciate the time, David. The one question I do want to ask before we close is, what makes you you? You obviously gave us insights into all the great things you've done, financial services, technology company, all the boards, advisory. How do you feed your growth and learning mindset? You were at the forefront of cyber fusion centers and a lot of innovation. What makes you you?
Ooh, look, I don't know how I answer that, to be honest. I guess I've always been a little bit, just naturally curious. I think I've used the word curious a little bit today. And I think I think entrepreneurship and entrepreneurs, there's a relationship there with curiosity and wanting to do and make things better and just not settle for the status quo. Okay, this is how we do it today, but surely there's a better way we can do that, right? And I think that's just naturally inbuilt in me to some degree. And I actually like learning. There's a piece around for me where I really enjoy learning every day. If I'm not learning and doing something new, I get bored really quickly. So I think that spurring on to learn and read and research and study is powerful. And as a result of that, you look at things differently. You look at things more broadly. So I think there's an element around that. And actually, there's a real passion for me about helping my industry.
Right.
And how do I give back to the industry, whether it's through insights, whether it's through action, whether it's helping create better products.
Curiosity, a desire to help, and just learning something new. Any tools, resources that you would recommend, David, for our audience that they would benefit from in terms of their incremental growth and learning, besides obviously a curious and a helping mindset?
Look, I actually think sitting down and talking to people is some of the best. And coming back to we were talking about some of these early stage startups and entrepreneurs. I've learned a lot just talking to them, because they're out talking to a lot of organizations and they're seeing a lot, and you'll have some really good dialogue. So I find that really good, and I enjoy the in-person piece as well, having a dialogue with someone. But there's some really great thought leadership articles in there. I think people like BCG and McKinsey do a really good job of giving you a view of, high level issues and maybe over the radar type thematics that we need to be thinking about. they're probably where I would start. LinkedIn's a really good place. I mean, there's a lot of garbage on LinkedIn, but there's a lot of really good stuff as well. Yeah. So, use that, read some interesting articles, but just don't read the article. Read the article and ask yourself the question, how does it apply to my environment? So be analytical about it. Think about how you apply, even if it's just one thing you learned or something you want to go and try differently. Go and do that.
Yeah. I love it. And that's the homework for the audience, right? What is the one thing that you learned from this conversation? There are so many I have learned. What is the one thing you have? And I think the one thing for me, beyond everything, is, I did pick up on the fact that I like that analogy of make some deposits before withdrawals. I think that's important. It's a very simple fact, but well articulated. Hey, David, this was such a pleasure having this conversation with you. I know you're a very busy man, so I really appreciate the time that you've given us and greatly appreciated the insights. Thank you again.
Chirag, thank you very much. Great to be here.
Thanks.